Hello, my name is Jess Thorpe. I'm the Head of Research at Nimbus 90, and a warm welcome to you joining our webinar series in partnership with Telstra and Telstra Purple, Building the Agile and Adaptive Business. So today we're going to look at the first pillar of building the agile and adaptive business, which is creating a workplace that doesn't just withstand change, but enables opportunities for growth and innovation. So workplace transformation, I think it's fair to say, has really stepped up a gear in recent months. And I am absolutely delighted to welcome three expert panelists: John Littlefair, Telstra Purple's Head of Modern Workplace Consulting; Jakob, VP People and Culture, Strategy and Insights at BP; and Angela Ignam Mathon, Global Head of People Analytics and Insight at Aviva, to explore what the modern workplace is and how to get there. So thank you to the panelists for joining us today. It's great to have you here. I hope you're all well. Cool. So to those of you watching and listening, if you have a question at any time, please do add it to the Q&A box with your name if you wish to be identified, and we will get through as many as we can. So let's get started. There are two aspects to the modern workplace that we're going to explore today. One relates to behaviours and culture that you might describe as modern or expect to find in high-performing organisations. But then the other is about the technology choices that you need to support and enable the right culture and behaviours. So I'm going to start with you, John, if I may, but how would you define and describe the modern workplace in the context of the work that you do at Telstra Purple?
Hi, Jess. So, I mean, I guess within Telstra, we have a system called the Future Way of Working, or FWOW, and essentially it's not the traditional workplace that you would imagine of a sea of desks. There are desks around the office. It's all completely open plan. There's no segregated offices for senior people or what have you. And it's all aimed at allowing the users to collaborate as much as possible. People can go and sit where they like. All the desks are configured in a uniform manner so that you've got docking stations, twin screens, webcams, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's designed to promote people collaborating with each other and being able to go and work cross team, and so departments aren't segregated and what have you. And I think that's how I would define a modern workplace, is allowing users to collaborate with each other and increase productivity across teams. And the increasing use of collaboration tools in that space, such as SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, etc. I think that is pivotal for an organisation to, especially now given the COVID side of things, to be able to allow users to work together in real time on documents, etc., etc. And obviously, security is key across all of that.
Absolutely, thank you. Jakob, I'm going to come to you because something of an understatement to say that BP is going through an awful lot of transformation at the moment. How do you view what the modern workplace is in the context of the work that you're doing there?
Yeah, I think before I get to answering that question, let me just give you a few sentences on what I believe the modern world is, and then from there transition to what the modern workplace is in response to that modern world. So I attended another webinar recently. It was three gentlemen from Deloitte, Equinor, and BP, and they were talking about their long-term views about the energy market. And they had various scenarios, and there was basically only one thing that they could agree on in those scenarios, and that was there was endless uncertainty, and whatever response you come up with has to be robust across a number of scenarios. In this case, it was scenarios for the energy transition, but it could be whatever scenario planning is relevant to your business model. So the work that I'm doing, and my view of the modern workplace, is to try to design how can we build an organization that is able to cope with all this uncertainty. And what are some of the axes of that? So if we want to be flexible, one of the I think pretty widespread responses to being able to be flexible at the moment is agile. So how do we enable agile ways of working? Down from the more operational aspects of, do we have Kanban boards, up to some of the cultural elements that take up more of my time. So that's one axis. And then another axis is the fact that we increasingly work with joint ventures. We increasingly work with contractors to bring in skills into the BP mix that we don't currently have. We are undertaking a massive shift from being an international oil company to being an integrated energy company. And that means that we need to solve lots of new problems that we haven't thought about before along that journey. So being able to pivot quickly, flexibly bring in skills, and having technology support that, I think is how I view the modern workplace.
Thank you. And Angela, over to you. Do you agree with that? Do those comments resonate with some of the challenges you face at Aviva? And what's your view of what the modern workplace really entails?
Yeah, I mean, I think at Aviva, the approach that we've taken is we're focusing a lot on, how we actually start to define things, right? And so one of the key areas that we're getting our heads around is how we actually define work, which is the type of work being done, and being able to understand, there's some activity that requires, or that is already quite digital, and it's been remote for a while, and so therefore not a massive issue or change given the current environment, because that work has always been done in that manner. But then there's other types of work where collaboration is quite key, and the ability to get that done in a collaborative manner. And so therefore, there does need to be an understanding of, okay, well, how do we ensure that the collaboration that we're doing digitally, once the new norm establishes itself, we can figure out, okay, so what are those key points where, we can define how we actually get together into an office, or we can define some sort of, smart working dynamic. But those are roles that we know are quite, where collaboration is quite important, and face-to-face, nothing really beats that. How do we account for that? And there's some types of work where it's really about security. And so even though you've got people working remotely and working digitally, security becomes a really big factor, and trying to ensure that there's a manner in which we can say, look, you got to actually access our platforms, by logging into our systems or coming into the office, et cetera. So what we try and do is really focus on defining the work in a really concrete manner, and then coming up with a solution that says, okay, so for that type of work, what is the best way to get that done effectively? And then based on that, coming up with a solution that says, here's how we then scale that. So that's kind of the approach. And I think everyone, from what I'm hearing, is basically grappling with that, is trying to define the sort of ways of working in the future that make sense for the business.
Absolutely. Thank you. I mean, I think that's three quite different perspectives, actually, but we can see these common principles sort of coming out. So, I mean, to open it up to the panel, let's talk about COVID and coronavirus, and how has the pandemic changed working practices, first of all. So, and anybody want to kick off on that?
I mean, I guess there's a lot of organizations out there that, probably wouldn't have allowed users to work remotely, or it was limited. And I think COVID has sort of thrown open the whole question of being able to work remotely, because everyone had to, apart from essential workers, everybody was forced to work remotely. And that's, I guess, caused organizations to have to change tack quite quickly and get their systems in order. And, I think it's allowed a lot of users to sort of get their wish and be able to work remotely and have to use all the corporate applications just as they would do in the office. And I think what it has done is, people who originally wanted to work from home all the time, I think you've got a lot of people now are craving to get back into the office and work with their colleagues and work, just have a bit of socialization in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. Jakob, Angela, how do you feel that coronavirus has changed working practices, or has it merely accelerated what was already happening?
I think ways of working have changed because, you're very much in everyone's personal life, right? So we're, I'm taking this call, I'm home, I've got my washing machine in the background, apologies. I've got all of this sort of dynamic happening. And I think it's created a context where, I normally would show up into an office space and I'm very much sort of, my armor's on and I'm just sort of professional Angela, but now professional and private Angela are kind of merging. And what does that look like? And how does that, impact my ability to show up and how I show up? And so I think that's another layer that, before there's more choice in how you manage that. Now that's sort of not as flexible. So I think there's a level of intimacy that is just forced upon us. But then I think equally, when I get stuff done. So before it was very much, these are the working hours, and that's when everyone actually, gets work done and collaborates. Now that's a lot more flexible because of the dynamic, right? And so there's moments where you're early morning getting together with teams because that makes more sense, or late evenings, or you're just juggling how that has to look like. In some cases, it might be that you leverage a weekend, but I think there's just another dynamic and dimension to how we get stuff done that's also now on the table, and all of that falls into the sort of flexible working dynamic, and so that's another layer that comes into play. And then I think the type of kind of conversations that then suddenly emerge, which is, there's a lot of information that you shared naturally with your colleagues informally, right? In the hallway, over coffee, that kind of contributed to how you got work done or how you sort of got information and received that. You don't have that necessarily in the same way now. And so it's almost like, how do you force those connections? And they're informal, and but still very helpful in guiding your thinking around how you sort of navigate an office space. But now there's no office space to navigate. You're just trying to navigate a project or an initiative. And so it changes almost the dynamic of how you operate. So I think those are probably the three areas that I probably noticed most significantly from a COVID dynamic.
Thank you. And Jakob, I mean, you've painted a picture really of some very long-term changes, which in the grand scheme of things, you'll be working towards those. But then you've got this short-term disruption. So there's kind of two levels here. Has COVID particularly changed any working practices significantly for you? And I guess has that changed your views on workplace transformation?
So has it changed anything for me? So I joined BP about 3 months ago. So what it has meant for me is I've never actually seen a BP employee in real life. I've only seen sort of two-dimensional views of people on the screen. So in that sense, a very real change. I suppose two perspectives here. Has COVID significantly changed the way we work? I don't personally think so. I think the science fiction author William Gibson once wrote that the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. And I think we're very much seeing that with Corona or COVID acting as a catalyst of trends that we were already seeing in ways of working. So I think that's point one. I think where there has been a significant change certainly in BP well, maybe not something that we didn't focus on already, but certainly something where we've ramped up our focus is something I started thinking about when Angela was speaking, which is we are now getting into the lives of people. It's becoming more personal. Work is more personal. Now, what does that mean? It means that we see the well-being of our people. Are they feeling bad? Are they feeling good? Is the room behind them messy to suggest that they're struggling, or is everything neatly squared away? So in BP, we've certainly seen that. When we review our data, we see that there's a level of anxiety already caused by the COVID pandemic. And then on top of that, we've now added Reinvent BP. So health and well-being and how we build resilience in our workforce is really coming to the fore. And is going to be one of the core pillars of our people and culture strategy going forward.
Absolutely, thank you. I think we're going to dig into collaboration because you've all mentioned it. It's incredibly important, but the way that we collaborate has changed. And as you said, Jakob, we're in this kind of two-dimensional world, which we're all used to, but does have quite a lot of implications. And as you've outlined, the mass shift to remote and very flexible working has been welcomed by many, but there's clearly some challenges, and there's certainly challenges for the longer term. So I'm going to come to you first, Ron, if I may, because we talked about collaboration. There's lots of tools, there's lots of ways to tackle this in different businesses, but what works, and how do you choose how to support collaboration? What are some of the things you've seen work really well, particularly in the last year?
as I said earlier, Jess, there's lots of users out there that before lockdown, they wouldn't have really had any cause to use any sort of collaboration tools. They wouldn't have had any reason to use Zoom or what have you, WebEx or Teams. And it's forced a step change in the way that they have to work to be able to integrate with their colleagues and, just keep in touch, work on documents collaboratively, etc., etc. So, I mean, the technologies that that we're seeing a lot of demand for, primarily, the Microsoft 365 suite of tools, SharePoint and OneDrive, and the way that it integrates with Teams to allow people to work on documents together in real time, see what their colleagues are working on, if they're working on a bid or I guess a financial submission. Everybody can work on the same document or spreadsheet, and people can see exactly what their colleagues are updating in real time. And I think that's key. And I think that's going to be something that users strive for when things do return to a bit of normality. And obviously, Zoom is a lot of people wouldn't have even heard of Zoom before lockdown, and now it's an absolutely key tool in both people's private lives with quizzes and what have you, but also equally in the enterprise space, being able to do things like webinars and town hall meetings with all of their users to keep them involved in what's going on within the workplace and other departments, just to try and stop them feeling siloed and I guess a little bit isolated, which is obviously a big worry for people's mental health, and that's what a lot of organizations are pushing for at the moment. And obviously you can also with these collaboration tools, there's no limit in terms of restricting you to working with your own internal people within the same organization. If you've got B2B or B2C federation, you can invite your partners and your customers to work on documents with you and with your colleagues, again, in real time, and you get to control the security around that. And I think that's what a lot of organizations have implemented during the last 6 months or so.
Yeah, absolutely. And Angela, that relates to some of the things that you were saying in your introduction. But I guess for you and also for Jakob as well, I mean, employees need to respond to change. The technology strategy might be right, the tools are good. I think we're all very appreciative of these tools to help collaborate, but not all users, as we know, are the same. So how do you tackle that, this level of change when your employee base at BP and Aviva is enormous? What are some of the ways to deal with that?
So I think there's probably a two-way to approach this, I guess, for me in any way. The data suggests that frequency is what colleagues have been demanding. So they want more frequent conversations, with their leaders or just in general, because that helps to ensure that they're going in the right direction. So there's more frequency in how we engage. I think, prior to COVID, if I, maybe had a weekly catch-ups or weekly interfaces with team members, it's almost like I'm at a daily touch point now. And, there's almost like a daily just making sure everyone's okay. So the frequency has increased. But then more specifically within my team, what they've asked for is for me to share more of my personal life with them, which I thought, again, prior to COVID, that was never something, it was always like, yeah, I mean, maybe, depending on the situation, you might, share some information, but there's almost a sense of, from the leadership, the more we open up and about our personal lives, my personal challenges, the more I kind of say things like, oh, I don't know the answer to that, or I'm not clear, or, but just kind of more I share sort of those personal dynamics of how I'm navigating. That seems to be comforting to them. And so there's been a lot of discussion around, we don't just want the corporate talk and the corporate speech. We want to really understand in a more genuine way how you're tackling it and what's going on. And so I think that's what the ask has been. And that's been actually quite interesting, because I think that's where they're starting to find some comfort. It's, oh, okay, she's also struggling with something. And I think that helps maybe just sort of balance the uncertainty and kind of I think it gives everyone a feeling that we're all in this together. And I think that's the most you can expect in a dynamic like this, because normally, we're in an office environment, there's a structure there, that type of, comfort and sort of that regular exchange really was helpful for people to kind of feel centered. With that being gone, I think the need for the more frequency, but also a bit more intimacy has meant that that's kind of what I think people are anchoring onto now. So I think those are the kind of the two things that I've noticed that have kind of shifted quite a lot now.
Jakob, I could see you nodding through some of that. I take it you agree, or that resonates with you. Oh, sorry, just to bring you off mute, and then we can hear your comment.
Sorry about that. Challenges of the modern workplace. So I had two reflections as I heard from the other panelists. One is a challenge, I think, for IT, and one I think is a challenge for leaders and employees. And if we start with the IT department first, people like me who are thinking about the workforce of the future are thinking along the lines of, as I said, more flexibility, more contractors, gig economy workers, joint ventures, etc. These are people we need to share data with and to collaborate with. And I think my experience, and this is going to be very much my experience of IT departments, is that there has been sort of a less is more approach to sharing data, which I think will come under fire in this modern world, because if we are to collaborate effectively across our organizations, we're going to have to get comfortable somehow with sharing more data. Obviously, there's going to be core data that we will not share with people outside of our organization, but having collaboration about more of our data, I think is going to be crucial, and IT departments need to figure out how they enable that. It's not been my experience that they do. And then the second axis is what Angela was picking up on there, which I think it very much resonates with me. I think we have seen leaders needing to step up through the crisis. And what do I mean by step up? One of the things we know, and which is a theme that Angela touched upon in her bit, which is really important as we want to be flexible, as we want to drive innovation, is that of employee voice. It is, do people feel that they can share challenges, be open about failures, that sort of thing. And when we share stories like the things that Angela just mentioned about, I had this personal failure, or I'm struggling with this with this in my life, we know that creates an environment for employees where they can share similar challenges, and they can collaborate more effectively because they share information more effectively. And I also used to head up people analytics, so I did some work on linking that to safety. And there's actually quite a clear link between the safety of people on an oil rig and whether they feel that they can comfortably share with their management problems that arise on an oil rig. Because if they don't tell their leaders openly that there's a spanner that was dropped somewhere, then someone's going to trip over that spanner at some point and people get hurt. So Angela's point on employee voice, absolutely key.
Thanks so much. I just want to read out a comment because from a listener, which is, it's not IT where the restrictions are, it's the legal / ISR and risk teams. John, I don't know whether you'd agree with that, and just sort of coming back to the IT point, some of the challenges around this flexible environment where data is shared, where collaboration can really happen, I think, in this agile way that we're all envisaging.
Yeah, I mean, I think IT just get on and implement whatever it takes to keep people working. They essentially their aim is to provide the solutions to a problem. And I think where a lot of organizations they've had to be completely agile in the way that they've deployed all of these new technologies in a massive rush in a lot of cases at the start of the pandemic. And it was almost a case of, well, let's just get stuff out there to get people working, and then we'll deal with the security as an afterthought. And what we're seeing now is a lot of organizations who are asking for assistance in securing the solutions that they've deployed during lockdown, because you've got a lot of organizations that have been forced to implement BYOD by stealth, to allow people to access devices or access from their own devices. And then it's how you secure that retrospectively and make sure that they keep control of their data. And we're putting in a lot of security tools, again, from, I guess, Microsoft 365 and from other vendors that allow corporations to keep control of that data, because you've got, potentially people who are able to access their mailbox on their own device, which then means that they could download a copy of their mailbox, and then you've got potential data leakage there. And it's important for an organization to stay on top of that and make sure that data is classified correctly and that they keep control of data leakage.
Absolutely. And Angelo, Jacob, Angelo, do you feel that maybe you've got some data to sort of see this, but there is some research to suggest that employees are becoming more aware and have become much more aware of security as a result of remote working in the last few months. So that's got to be a good thing, surely. Is that something that you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's an awareness now of, how they're working from home, how they're sharing information, if they're looking at sensitive information, the environment in which they're operating. So there's an awareness of that. I think it's also a concern sometimes, or fear associated with that, and wanting to make sure that they are following protocol and using information correctly. So again, a need for us to be really clear with them as to kind of what our expectations are, and to support them accordingly. But I think all of that then adds up to pressure. Right, in terms of, again, there was a way of working where everyone knew exactly how to deliver, what good looked like, and it was a lot easier to say, yep, I'm doing the right thing. And now sometimes that's adding a level of uncertainty around, am I doing it properly? And am I considering all the right factors? And so again, there's just a need for us to really over communicate in some cases, and to also ensure that, they're not under this expectation that's impossible, that you've got to get it right immediately. And so I think, yeah, it does, the focus on security, and rightly so, is definitely there. But again, there's a need for us to ensure that we support them through that, and then that's not interpreted as pressure, it's just interpreted as adaptation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I do think what you've highlighted there is that this is a long-term change. Maybe not as long term as, say, getting to net zero or something like that. But we're talking, this is not going to revert in 6 months or maybe even a year. And John, and Jacob as well. But bearing that in mind, I mean, what does sort of the next year look like for workplace transformation? Are there any kind of key priorities you think that businesses need to think about to sort of get towards this modern workplace? Anything that springs to mind?
I mean, from my side of things, I think that a lot of organizations are going to have to continue to embrace remote working, because people have got used to it over the last 6 to 9 months. And also make sure that they continue to make use of the technology that they've implemented. Users have got really used to working collaboratively, and it's going to mean a big step shift in working practices for some organizations, and even going down to potentially reinventing the workplace, looking at the environment that people have to work in, to make sure that when they get back into the office, they can continue to collaborate, they can continue to thrive in what they're doing. And and I think that is going to be the key factor that people are going to have to take into effect going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. John, that is a really exciting subject that I think we're going to talk about in just 1 minute, because what happens when there is this sort of bigger return to office life. However, we've had some really good comments and questions come in. So I'm going to go to Maxine's comment first of all, which is IT is an enabler. We often shoulder the blame when colleagues don't understand that definition of responsibility. So everybody needs to understand where the risk is and what their personal or corporate risk appetite is like, which I think is a really good point. Angela, Jacob, I don't know if you've got any comments on that.
Well, I mean, so I guess I did poke the bear a little bit on that one. So maybe if I start first, I think what tends to happen in an organization like BP is we set the bar relatively high with our legal framework, and then on top of that, other bits of BP add layers of security until we're so secure that we can't do anything. I'm being a little bit contentious here, but I think we are seeing a couple of pendulum swings here where we go from one extreme to the other. Now, I'm not suggesting that on security that IT security is going to win. Of course, as the other panelists pointed out, and as everyone on the call will know, we need IT security. There's core data that we would never share with anyone. However, I think we're still finding out what the middle ground between sharing everything and not sharing anything is. And that is a balance we need to work to strike in the years ahead. The other thing is on the point of working from home. I think in the beginning of the pandemic, if you saw, all the buzz on LinkedIn, everyone was like clapping and saying, "Oh, working from home is the best thing ever. Why didn't we do this before?" And then a couple of months into the pandemic, people were going, "Hey, actually the office was kind of a nice place." And you remember, when we used to put on nice clothes and go there, and there'd be lunch and we could talk to people and, meet each other at the water cooler, along the lines of some of what Angela was saying earlier. I think we're gonna need to again figure out it's not going to be all working from home. There are some things that we definitely want to do in the office, and what are those things? And I think particularly for our younger colleagues who have less established networks and need more guidance in their day-to-day working, it's going to be a challenge if we go too far to the working from home.
Absolutely. Angela, I can see you nodding throughout that. These are similar challenges. Any response to what Jakob has said?
Yeah, and I was going to say, I just completely agree. I mean, we're exactly in that same space. We're trying to understand what that looks like. I think, more seasoned colleagues are probably easier for them to work from home because they're more familiar. They can navigate new colleagues, or sort of, recent grads, et cetera. They might still need some of the structure, some of the construct of, sort of collaboration and engagement. And so, again, trying to identify, depending on the type of work that you are in your journey, what's that strategy that we need to come up with. And so I don't think it's, what we're calling it smart working at Aviva. It's finding that solution between, how we kind of look at the digital environment, but also make sure that we're doing it in a safe way in terms of how we leverage the office space. And so, yeah, we're reviewing all of that at the moment.
Thanks. We're gonna dig back into that in just one second, but I do just want to read out a couple of things. We're just going to flick back to IT and close this one off. But we have a listener viewer who's talked about, "I've been spoon feeding people on how to use OneDrive, Teams, Office 365 since March, but even now I find people who haven't even signed into their OneDrive desktop client." So the challenge is not just rolling out tech solutions fast; it's group awareness and engagement about how to use that tech, which I think you would all agree with. But how do you solve that? And what is the group awareness and engagement about? Is it more frequent sort of conversation and communication, like as Angela highlighted, people want, or are there other things that can be done?
I think, sorry, Angela. I was just going to say it's pointless an organisation rolling out the tools if they don't enable their staff to use them. I think it's vital that organisations have frequent refresher sessions on how to use these various technologies and how people can gain the maximum benefit from them. We've got a lot of customers that do sort of monthly town halls, and sort of that will include a session on a specific collaboration tool or an application that's been rolled out, just so that the users can fully understand how that they can, I guess, as I've said before, maximize the benefit from these and continue to work effectively with their colleagues.
And to come to you, Angela.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I think a lot of that is, the leadership, behaviors, right? If we are leveraging the technology, if we are, using those platforms, then you sort of invite your teams to join, and then your teams invite others to join. And I think it's one of those things where the more you see leadership engaging with the technology and the tools, and again, there's, like I said, like John was saying, there's opportunities to learn how to engage. It's a lot harder to kind of say, well, hang on, if my leadership is doing it, if everyone's signing up to kind of learn how to leverage it, why would you sort of stay on the sidelines and not participate and get involved? So I think that would naturally change that behavior. So I think, again, if you're going to spend the time and the money and the effort to deploy a new technology, you then have to follow up with that sort of change management piece, right? And get people engaged with it. And so yeah, I think it's just constantly making sure you're leveraging that.
And is change management, has there been time for change management over the last few months? Is that a piece of the jigsaw that is sometimes forgotten in order to, and how do we deal with that when change at the moment and uncertainty? I think this goes back to what Jakob said at the very beginning. There is an enormous level of uncertainty. So what is the role for change management in that? John, I don't know if you've got any insights from some of the projects that you've worked on.
No, I think a lot of the customers all of the customers that we've been working with, I think at the start, change management, it sort of went out of the window initially because they were just like, we just need to get stuff out there to allow people to work effectively remotely. But very quickly it was brought under control. There was a lot of retrospective things that took place that just to allow organizations to regain control of their environments and understand fully what had been implemented, and just embrace the change essentially.
Absolutely. I think if we could kind of scroll forward and think about the future of the office, I think Jakob's given us a really good opener there about what is the office for and what does it look like. And also I know at Telstra and Telstra Purple, John, that your description of the office, where I think it's, as you say, very open plan, people can work from anywhere, that there aren't territories for people. I think these really bring to life what modern workplaces and spaces are. So what do they look like? What do we think we're moving towards, and just some opinions on that, and what habits are going to be quite difficult to maybe to change? What might slip back as we do go towards some sort of type of normality? Any thoughts on that? Open to the panel.
Yeah, I think it depends on the organization and historically the vertical that the organization sits in, because you've got a lot of tech companies that for a long time now have had funky offices that promote getting millennials in, and it's a lot of them were competing for staff using their office spaces as a selling point to try and draw in talent and what have you. And I think going forward that's going to filter down into different sectors that have been more traditional in the way that their offices have been configured. And I think you are going to see a lot more offices get reconfigured into more open plan with more collaboration spaces, more meeting rooms, because I think it's proven that people work better when they're working together instead of siloed. And I'd like to think that is going to be the big step change in seeing a lot of organizations reconfigure the way that their working environments look for their users.
Yeah, absolutely. Jakob, Angela, any thoughts on that? And also, Jakob, particularly, at BP, you're talking about higher levels of contractual workers, and then also you've got people out on rigs, which I know is a different thing. But any views on what John has said about the future, these hybrid physical virtual workspaces?
Yes, I guess I should point out that the future that I'm describing is well into the future. We're talking 5, 10 years into the future, but that's sort of the realm I inhabit. I sit in my slightly ivory tower-esque role and think about the future. I think, and I'm going to be a little bit of a fly in the ointment here, on the workplace, most of the research that I've seen suggests that the workplace isn't that important. Which is not to say that it's irrelevant, but it means that workplace and funky offices, to use that term, is an artifact of culture, but it is not culture. And what attracts people are great cultures that are grounded in a great purpose. We think we have a good one, but there are other ones out there. And then ways of working that link with that culture. So you have great ways of working that support the culture and the purpose. And then you've got, you try to capture that as best you can in how you design the office. But I think I would suggest that, for instance, some of the research that Google did into this, they didn't really come up with anything. They've got all the cool, flashy colors in their office, but they didn't really find any material levers that would increase engagement.
Thank you. Angela, your views on this future workspace, hybrid, virtual, and any comments on what your previous panelists have said?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think, it's it's something that we're still exploring. I think there's a level of that that's always been there at Aviva. And I just think we're kind of testing and learning, just to see sort of what's the optimal dynamic. And I think each team, given the work that they're having to sort of focus on and deliver, is kind of trying to define that for them. And so that's kind of the kind of learning space that we're in at the moment.
Thank you. And I want to take a question and explore another area before we come to a close. So how do you ensure the psychological safety of the staff when lines are blurred between home and work-life balance? And again, this relates to some points that were made earlier. Any thoughts on that? It's a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can only go back to what I've kind of learned from my staff, right? And in terms of, my direct reports and then discussions that we've had from the data, which is the more that the senior leaders open up and share and talk about their challenges, the more it creates a space where if the leadership's comfortable discussing certain things, then everyone else feels like they've got permission to do so as well. And I think that's where we start to kind of get into that psychological safety kind of space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess another question off the back of that, which is just to explore this final point, is what you've described, Angela, is potentially a change in leadership style. I don't know if we could articulate it like that, but has leadership fundamentally changed as a result of this very quick shift we've seen? And how do we learn to be better leaders and managers in these virtual physical environments? Any thoughts on that?
I think if I can pick up on that one, I think this was in response to something I said about, well, I guess both Angela's and mine point on psychological safety. To answer your question on leadership, I think we are seeing a new type of leaders. Some describe it as servant leadership, but essentially leadership is shifting from your traditional command and control to context setting. So just outlining what is the relevant information that we should be reacting to, and then coaching your team through the process of making good decisions for themselves. I think if you want to see something that really speaks to that, I'd encourage anyone who hasn't seen it to look up Netflix's cultural statement, because they do it really well. But how do you create psychological safety? Well, I think there are two things. One is the point that Angela's already made really well around how do you show a certain sense of vulnerability and able to, ability to react to and learn from failure. I think that's absolutely key. But I would add to that purpose. And not purpose in the sense of, let's make some grand statements about how we're going to save the world, and then everyone should repeat that over and over again until it feels like we've branded them. But rather, asking employees, how do you think your unique abilities, you as a person, contribute to this greater purpose? You joined because of the purpose. What's your role in delivering it? I think that creates a link between the purpose of the organization and the purpose of the individual, and that will be a more sort of enduring bond that will help us through times of turmoil.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for those comments. We are actually out of time, and I want to say a huge thank you to our panelists for taking on what I think is an incredibly important subject, but also a very difficult one. And I think you have explained some of the complexities around workplace transformation at the moment. So I'd like to say a big thank you to you, and also thank you to the audience for your time and really insightful questions. We covered a lot of ground there.